Hello, and welcome to the Artists Make Money podcast, where artists share their thoughts and feelings about money. I'm your host, Vivienne Egan. I'm an interactive theatre and comedy producer, podcaster, and freelance business writer, and I love finding out about all the ingenious ways artists make their money. Today's guest is poet, educator, and performer Dan Simpson. We talked about creating a full-time, self-employed poetry career, considering artistic work as an extension of yourself, the trick to getting grant applications approved, and how practices of teaching and self-reflection are helpful for writing poetry. This episode of Artists Make Money is brought to you by our friends at Side Hustle Sites. They make designer flat pack websites, like the IKEA of websites, with helpful instructions and guides for how to make your website look really great. It is cheaper than Squarespace, and their templates are actually specialized to particular jobs. So they've got templates for theatre professionals and for freelance writers. I'm actually about to use them to build my freelance writing website because I don't have one. Or they can actually design you a website from scratch, which they did for me on the Artists Make Money website. If you sign up via sidehustle-sites.com/AMM, I will link that in the show notes, you will get a fantastic, professional looking website and your first month subscription free and the second month half price. That is just for Artists Make Money listeners. On with the show. Hi Dan, welcome to the Artists Make Money podcast. Would you please introduce yourself to the people and tell them how you make your money?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, I'm Dan Simpson. I'm a spoken word poet. I'm a writer, a performer, an educator, facilitator, and I produce literature projects and shows as well. And I suppose all of those things together make me money.
Great. So you do like full-time doing creative stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. And I suppose quite a large proportion of that is the facilitation, teaching, education side of things, which to me feels like really integral to the practice, actually. Some people kind of see it maybe as distinctive or separate to sort of being creative, but absolutely for me, it's part and parcel. The way you can become good at this stuff is, first of all, by learning, but also when you actually break down what you do and teach it to other people, it's certainly a way to sort of figure out how your own creativity works, which can only make it better, I think.
Definitely. It's so hard to go, oh, I know what I do, but I don't really know how I do it or why I make the choices I do. So as soon as you have to like do that self-reflection, you have to become better, I think, because otherwise you're just kind of you're like going on gut instinct. But if you can kind of have the process and understand your process, then yeah, it's definitely
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of artists just kind of do work instinctively, and those instincts are honed over, months or years of practice and feedback and the inner critic and all these things. But actually, when you take some consciousness to it and go, oh, how do I actually do this? Because young people are asking me, how do you write a poem? And you go, oh, I have no idea, actually. Because you've kind of forgotten the sort of more graft of it. Not all artists are like this, but I think some artists, it sort of does become just much more easy. And I don't know if that's just the neural pathways being more used that you're just engaging with to sort of reach something that you feel will be critically quite good. That's sort of, you slip down those neural, if I'm going to mix up some metaphors really badly early on, but I think you kind of like slide down those neural pathways really easily because they've been really well used before, so it's kind of more frictionless. So as soon as you ask the question like, oh yeah, there used to be friction there, it used to be hard to write stuff, or it used to be like a struggle to make something good, you kind of forget that side of things, I think, at some point. So it's a really good practice to figure that out. How do I actually do what I do?
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of snobbery as well in that, like, that whole like bullshit phrase, those who can't do teach, which is
Ugh.
such a lie.
Absolutely. I mean, there is an element where they are, distinctive skills, and you have in all art forms, you have fantastic artists who are lousy teachers.
Hmm.
And you have people who are fine or an okay, or not, maybe not even that good at their art. Fantastic facilitators and teachers, and they can certainly unlock things in people. So yeah, there's not a huge, there's some overlap, but they're definitely distinctive things as well, for sure.
So how long have you been making a full-time living from poetry?
So I'm going to be coming up to 8 years this year.
Wow.
I was sort of part-time before that. I think I got my first paid gig getting on for just over 10 years ago, 11 years ago, maybe. Um, yeah, my first gig, I got some money for, and I was shocked. I got 40 quid to do a 10-minute set. I was like, oh, people pay people for this stuff. Cool. Maybe I'll give that a go. So yeah, so I guess I'm coming up to, sort of, yeah, 8 years at the end of this year of not having another proper job.
Yeah. How did you make your money before when you were doing it part-time?
So I graduated, and then I went to work for a business consultancy. We were working in higher education, and we were working in the arts. And
Hmm.
I was just the sort of PA, office manager, admin assistant sort of person. They were a husband and wife team, so I was their only employee. And yeah, it was. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do out of university. I had zero plans. I'd applied for no jobs. Um, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I'd always been very proactive with the Drama Society, and I organised this charity gig, and I basically wrote to all of the sponsors of the local arts festival saying, can I have like 500 quid to hire the equipment and things? And they were the one company who emailed me back saying, yeah, here you go. Here's the money to do that. We're Kent I'm graduated from the University of Kent, and they said, oh, we're Kent graduates as well. Here's 500 quid. They came to the event, which was a shambles. It was like a 24-hour comedy event. But fortunately, they came during the 1 hour that it was okay. And obviously thought, oh, he knows what he's doing. Didn't know what I was doing. And thought I was decently organized enough to employ me. So yeah, they offered me a job out of university. Worked for them for 2 years, learning how to be organized and learning the arts industry from behind the scenes a bit. Then yeah, got that gig, the 40 quid 10-minute job. Quit my job a couple of months later, moved back to London, ran out of money, and then just hustling away, just like talking to people, going to gigs, doing the poetry thing. And then I ended up doing this one-off marketing job for a poetry show that was touring. Didn't know, again, never done marketing, didn't know what I was doing, thought I'd have a stab at it. Did that, did okay, and then got employed from that by the National Portfolio Organisation, the Arts Council funded charity for spoken word, who are called Apples and Snakes. And yeah, ended up working for them for 2 years as a marketing officer, doing digital stuff. And then yeah, that was 8 years ago I left that job. That was a long answer to your question, Viv. But
No.
yeah, that's that.
Fine.
I've had two proper jobs since university, which were PA, office manager type dude, and marketing person for arts charity. Yeah.
What did you learn about the arts industry from behind the scenes at the consultancy?
I learned that there are a lot of artists and a limited amount of funding, which should be obvious, but it's another thing to kind of know that. It's another thing to really see that. I suppose I got to know decision makers, arts administrators quite well, not just like individually, but I suppose the kind of person who was working on that side of the arts, which is really useful. When you become the artist, you're going to those people for work. You're talking to these people, to those kind of people at parties and things like that, and often they're artists themselves. A lot of arts administrators are part-time and doing art as well. So in so many ways, just they're just like us. They just want the best for the arts. They want creativity to happen effectively, and have a responsibility for spending often public money on artists and art. So yeah, it was really useful to kind of get to grips with the landscape, know what's going on in the world of art, really broadly, not just the performing arts and literature where I kind of sit. But yeah, it gave me that mentality of know what's going on, that sort of landscape thinking. where do you then fit in as an artist? Um, and yeah, that's sort of more perhaps strategic, big picture thinking. Um, yeah, I'd say that's what working behind the scenes sort of gave me, plus some skills in sort of doing finances and admin stuff and marketing and all that stuff, all those things we need to be for ourselves when you're a solo artist who
Mm.
is their own producer, accountant, business development manager, or PR officer, all of the things we have to be as solo artists.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, what did you learn from working for apples and snakes? Like, what about marketing? Because I think
Mm.
that is something that a lot of people, and in fact, all of the things that you just listed, you kind of think, oh, I'm going to be an artist. What do I like? And you focus on your practice and the creation and stuff, but there are all these other things that can't be neglected.
Mm.
What were the biggest takeaways that you got from working inside an organization like that?
Yeah, I think from a marketing point of view, it's knowing what marketing to do.
Mm,
It's such a nebulous word. Uh,
mm,
it's very simple things like who are your audience? And for me as a solo artist, my audience aren't hugely the public, not directly often. Um, my audience is going to be more people who might employ me for a job or
mm,
see my website or see my social media profile when I apply for an opportunity. So actually my audience is probably going to be more decision makers, gateholders,
mm.
gatekeepers type people, arts administrators, yeah, all of like the
Yeah.
people who hold the purse strings or run the project. So for me, I'm not marketing generally to the public. I might do on specific projects, but as a
Mm,
general artist, yeah, my audience are the people who are going to employ me for those projects, where the marketing to the public happens after that. Um, that was kind of my approach from the beginning. A lot of artists will obviously want to build a fan base and work it through it that way. I think I realized quite early on that's really hard in poetry. It's a small art form.
mm,
Spoken word is also pretty not the biggest compared to music or comedy or theatre, where you could argue there's enough audience out there that if you had a small proportion of it, they could sustain your art form.
mm,
That's not impossible in poetry, but it's vanishingly small and rare that you can make a living purely from writing and performing.
mm,
You have to go viral on something, or you have to cross over into music or comedy. So I think I realized quite early on that that felt like a big ask, and I certainly didn't feel maybe talented enough or niche enough, or sort of what I'm offering is maybe not going to be have that level of popularity. Um, so I think I decided quite early on that my audience is sort of the people making projects happen. I think I also very much early on wanted to be a participatory artist. I didn't want to just do this for myself and go, here's my art, take it or leave it.
mm,
I wanted to make it inclusive and bring people in. I wanted people to be part of that in a way that, just making the art and putting it into the world is a little less focused on that, which is why, again, I think the education facilitation side of stuff is so key and important. So, yeah, very early on, realizing that my audience were going to be teachers who might book me for a workshop in a school, or a literature project manager who's looking for a poet to work on this project in a community, or looking to commission somebody to speak to a certain group of people, whatever it might be. So, yeah, very much tailoring my output for that. At the same time, very much just being a person, very much just being like, yeah, Dan is a poet. That's his job, but also who he is. There's no
mm,
distinction or difference between those people. People talk about authenticity in marketing and looking for
mm,
what's your voice and all that stuff. And I think you can get a little bit wrapped up in it. Um, for me, the art is an extension of who I am. It is who I am. So, um, yeah, not being too clinical about that marketing and saying, oh,
mm,
Dan poet all the time, that's all you ever see. No, actually it's Dan the person who happens to make poetry and do that stuff as well.
mm. I
Mm.
think that understanding of your target market, that is such a useful thing to think about, and to realize that the buyers of poetry are not necessarily the people on the street or the individual fan.
Yeah.
That's a very savvy kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. So and in a sort of I guess day-to-day way, how does that reflect? Like, is that how you built your website? And did you, I don't know, use kind of keywords that people might be searching if they're looking for a poetry facilitator, for example, on your
Mm.
website?
Yeah, definitely all that stuff. I built mine on I originally had WordPress and then found it very unwieldy and difficult personally. I'm sorry if your podcast is sponsored by WordPress, Viv.
Mm-mm.
I'm brought to you by Squarespace now. Just found it much easier to develop from there. Yeah, I love website design is so interesting because it
Mm.
feels like the last thing you do. You go, okay, potentially it feels like here's what I do and here's what I am. I'll just put that all on a website. But actually, when you start to come design it, you go, oh, well, what do I actually do? How do I communicate that with my audience? And also, to a degree, the public. Like, I'm selling books through my website. I want people to come to it to find out about the cool projects I'm on, which is a more general public thing. So, yeah, very much making some decisions around what do you front and center? What are my sort of product areas, for want of a better word? What do I offer? And so, coming without that being complicated or unwieldy. So yeah, I spent even in this introduction where you said what do you do, I'm like, here are my 4 things,
Mm.
and I kind of slightly expanded on some of those 4 things into maybe 6 or 7 things. And I didn't say I help people edit poems. That's not a major element of thing I do, but it's something I do.
Mm.
Mentoring, professional development for other artists, things like that I do aren't on my website because they're either a small thing I do, or that's not something I'm pitching for work for, or it's not interesting to the public. So very much, yeah, getting into website design early on leads you into thinking, what am I about? What am I offering? Who's going to be, more importantly, who's going to be seeing this? So when I came to redesign my website a couple of years ago, I thought, right, who's going to be looking at this website? Who are the most important people who are going to be looking at this website? And it's probably somebody who's going to look up my name after I put a submission in for a big chunk of work. And so I thought, right, the first thing to front and center are the coolest projects that I've been working on, or the most interesting things, or the things that have sort of reputation from other people that, you're sort of saying, I've done work with X, Y, and Z organizations who are world renowned or whatever. So that for me became that's on the homepage. So that's the
Mm.
first thing they see. Oh, this guy knows what he's about. He's worked with all these interesting people. He's doing interesting work. Great. And then thinking about what you offer as sort of the secondary thing. So that's popped up into the menu essentially. And yeah, like getting into that like level of design thought, it's sort of like,
Mm.
yeah, what does that mean? And like,
Mm.
who am I as an artist? Yeah, it's a fascinating place to start honing, who you are and what you do
Yeah.
as an artist, for sure.
And packaging it up.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it's useful because I think a lot of artists, there are many, many, many things that they are interested in, that they
mhm.
do, that they can do, that they'd like to do.
Yeah.
And it's like you could put all of that on your website, or you could have several different websites, or
Mm,
there are sort of any number of ways you can kind of approach
yeah.
that depending on, you know,
Yeah.
how invested you are in each of those ideas. Um, but yeah, but I think it is so important to spend the time to think about it.
Mm. It's also that sort of precision of language is literally, when you're a poet, you're sort of expected to have a level of use of
Mm,
language that is right. So you're sort of, creating confidence in people that
mm,
what you're doing, which is, when you look at a website that is poorly designed or clunky or just looks a bit messy, even if that artist is really good, I think there's something instinctively you kind of go, oh,
mm,
and one thing I feel is that with all of this, particularly the marketing stuff, you're sort of just trying to give reassurance. It's holding confidence in people. And this is weirdly translates into like hosting a show or running a workshop.
mm,
You're saying to people, I know what I'm doing. I'm good at this. You're
mm,
safe with me.
mm,
And that's essentially what you want your website to say. Um, and there's various ways to do that. One way to do that is to have it looking good, which is quite straightforward, really.
yeah.
And again, with all these things, if these are things we can do ourselves, but it's the kind of thing that if making a website is a big, difficult job, if it's something that's going to take days and days or weeks and weeks, and you don't have those sort of skills and don't have the time to learn those skills or the interest in it, it's the kind of thing paying somebody to do will return. Like, you'll get such a return on that, because it'll just be done. So you can spend your time on the things you actually want to do, which might be making art, might be writing applications for jobs, and for work. So yeah, it's a real key thing, I think, both website and the social media presence.
How large a chunk of your time would you say you spend on applying for different kinds of jobs? And do you apply for grants as well? Do you do funding stuff?
Yeah, a bit of a mixture, really. I basically apply for almost any job I think that I almost roughly fit into, which I find through arts jobs. And there's the National Association of Writers in Education, there's Arts Professional, eDigest from Arts Admin. There's a whole bunch of mailing lists that I use to scout jobs. And yeah, I pretty much look through those mail outs, I'd say every day, every other day if I'm busy, and just sort of bookmark literature opportunities, anything calling out for a poet or writer or performer, whatever it might be. And I tend to apply for all of them. There's very few that I don't apply for. So how much of my time? I'd say an application takes on average an hour to put together, depending on the complexity of it. But that's after applying for stuff for the best part of a decade. So I have some very good paragraphs that I can use as a model for, and then tailor to that application. When you're going for, a writer in residence or a poet in residence job, they're pretty similar. So I can certainly take an old application, rewrite it, redraft it, make it specific for that brief, find where I would connect with it, and make that bit the sort of personalized stuff. But when the question is can you turn up on time and are you organized, there's a standard paragraph you can copy and paste and put into that, which does the job. So yeah, even though it might take an hour to apply for lots of stuff, that's definitely having honed a lot of applications over the last few years. So how much of a proportion do I spend? I'd probably spend 2 or 3 hours a week on applying for stuff, which isn't a huge amount of time in some ways. It is quite intensive to do. Yeah, and it's always the tricky one to get around to when you're in delivery mode, when you're having to actually do the creation or you're facilitating workshops. Yeah, for me anyway, it's probably 2 or 3 hours a week, I'd say, on average, on a busy week for that. Plus looking through the lists. So yeah, there can be some weeks though that there's 4 or 5 opportunities all deadlined on the same day or within the same 48 hours, and you sort of go, oh, I need to spend a day applying for things. Yeah, and in terms of grants, yeah, I go for Arts Council grants, particularly. Had a couple of successes with those, which is wonderful, because then you get to make the project you fully want to make yourself, and dictate the entire thing. What is it going to be about? And yeah, I've been okay on that. I haven't had many solo ones. I usually work in partnership for those. And yeah, I'm in the middle of one right now. I'm Experimental Words, where we've paired poets and scientists together, and we've made a spoken word album, which is going to be released on Spotify and Amazon Music and all that stuff next month. And yeah, that was an Arts Council grant to make that happen, which was like a dream. So yeah, they're the trickier ones to get. They're very competitive, and you have to have a good old track, not necessarily a track record, but certainly a strong core idea and good partners on board, that sort of thing, to get those ones.
So when you tell people that you're a poet, or when you told people that you were thinking of quitting a job to go into poetry, what kinds of responses did you get, or / do you get?
Yeah, a real variety. So I remember I'm first generation university educated type person. So coming from my dad's a black cab driver, my mum worked in a library, and so yeah, I think the idea was for me to go to university and go sort of be the first sort of white collar worker type job. That was maybe where you'd expect people to go. So go getting to work for a business consultancy sounds all very corporate and like, oh, earning decent money. And yeah, so that was very much like where I first went. And there was definitely a path, through that. I could have gone to work for bigger consultancy of some sort, that sort of thing, if I'd wanted to. And maybe there was an expectation to get something a little solid and reliable for income. So I graduated in 2008, which is when the recession just started, and then the austerity really kicked in 2009. And I quit my job in 2010. So my dad, other people were concerned, like, you're leaving this stable job that's paying okay, that has prospects for you to move onwards and upwards, sort of thing, to try poetry. Who earns a living from poetry? Like, if you might know a musician or two, maybe you know an actor or two who's doing all right and whatever, scraping by or doing well. And you don't really hear about, and particularly with music and maybe comedy and actors, there's the potential for superstardom. That's what you're aspiring, not necessarily the artists themselves, but I think there's a perception amongst some people that that's what you're aspiring to, that you're going to be on, I was going to say, really show my age, you're going to be on Top of the Pops, or you're going to be on on TV and that sort of thing, which is obviously not what. Oh my gosh, which is absolutely not where a lot of artists want to end up. But you can understand in the public consciousness why there's, you're going towards this thing, you could be a superstar, earning tens of thousands of pounds per appearance, or potentially millions of pounds, which there are comedians earning absolutely millions and millions, and musicians and actors, of course. You don't hear that about poetry. So to pick poetry, and particularly in spoken word, which 10 years ago nobody had heard of, even though it's probably the most ancient art form we have, it was kind of like people didn't quite understand. It's not a sensible choice. I still don't think it was a sensible choice, but I was in my early 20s. I loved this thing. I wanted to explore it and see what happened. And really, I kind of knew that, like a lot of art forms, they blur at the edges. Poetry, spoken word can become monologue, can become theatre, can become music, can become comedy, can become a sitcom, can become, like these are all very nebulous. These are just terms we have for specific things that are useful for marketers and to give an audience an idea of what they might get. But for me, it was sort of like, this is the poetry, spoken word is where I'm leaning towards, but I don't see a huge distinction between that and stand-up, or that and theatre. So I kind of thought, I'm dabbling in all these art forms. So when I said I was, quitting to be a poet and to do spoken word, there was a variety of responses. Some people, like, mostly were kind of sort of, I'm not understanding how that could be a living. How can you make money from this? And when I first started, my boss at the consultancy was like, right, Dan, you're leaving us in the middle of a recession to try and be a poet. Let's sit down and do a 5-year business plan. And I was like, yes, wow, absolutely, that's what we need to do.
Ooh, what was in the business plan?
So fortunately, like Tim, who's now one of my best friends, basically, he does this. That's one of his things he does for a living, right? He's a consultant. He does executive coaching and helps organizations, even if that organization is of one. So what was in the 5-year business plan? We did things like, very basically, what are going to be your expenses for living every, like, year on year, and like asking questions like, well, how many times do you want to eat out? Where do you want to eat out? Let's like put some numbers on all this. Wow. And one thing he said really early on, which I'm really grateful, which is such a good challenge, was like, what's not just survival? What's like having a happy life? What's having a nice life? Like, what's your minimum to feel good about existing, about being? And that's a different number to surviving. So that gives you some targets for income. Then sort of breaking down, like, well, what does a poet earn? What's a day rate in a school? Is that 50 quid? Is that £1,000? Let's go find this stuff out. I didn't necessarily know that at the time. So going to do the research, that sort of thing. Then identifying sort of where a current poet's working, what projects are you seeing come out? Who are the landscape stuff? Who are the organizations paying for poetry to happen in places? All that kind of thinking. And then we did an amazing exercise, which I do with artists sometimes, which is sort of, in 5 years' time, like, let's go through your day hour by hour. What do you want to be doing? Who are you having a meeting with? Where are you going? What are you doing? Where do you live? Where are you eating lunch? Because there's a difference between eating a 2-star Michelin hotel and grabbing a Greg's pasty. Both are options. You can choose. What do you want? So yeah, that sort of thinking was really, really useful. So the blue sky kind of stuff. And then translating that into something that feels like a bit like a mission statement, or, I mean, I've gone much more like holistic and earthy about everything now, but it could be like a mantra, or it could be a you know, an intention, if you like. And so my intention was, in what was it, in 5 years, to be a nationally known spoken word artist, something like that. And it was like, that's this business plan honed down to one sentence. And so all of the decisions I then made can be run through that filter. Does this decision lead me towards that? That's not the only thing. You know, sometimes you go, well, I need money, so does this opportunity or job or commitment or time I'm about to spend, does that lead towards money, happiness, or money, happiness, or fulfilling sort of work? And you know, if it hits 2 out of 3 of those, then that's a good a good thing to lean towards. So just kind of coming up with those sort of ways of thinking, I suppose, as a self-employed person. So yeah, that's what we did for business planning. And then we do little check-ins every 6 months or so, see how things were going, set new targets, change things around, see what was working, see what wasn't, refining those sort of labels that I've given myself. And then eventually that turned into playing too much Xbox, and so we stopped doing the business planning and just played Xbox and hung out and had beers. So yeah, that relationship somewhat changed over the years.
Right. So that was just a friend just offering that out of the kindness of his heart.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was my boss who was, I think, concerned
A
about
boss who
me
became a friend.
going exactly, who's concerned about me starving,
Yeah.
and wanting to help out. And yeah. So that was yeah, really, you know, there's all of these journeys, all the journey from people sort of having a passion or a hobby or something they enjoy, to translating that into a living. Like I think that sort of, there's so much going on behind the scenes of that people don't necessarily know. And that can be people like Tim, who, you know, mentored me and gave me advice like that. Yeah, it is definitely a bit of a, the behind the scenes stuff is what people don't see. And I think that's true for, you know, so many art forms. You see the finished work and you don't understand, sometimes people don't understand how you get to that, and it feels impenetrable. And certainly poetry can do that. But also the fact of being a poet or being an artist, it's a process. And you know, one thing we do as professionals, I think, is sort of, to a degree, hide that process. That's what, you know, marketing can do. You say, here I am, I'm the finished product, I'm exactly what you want. You're often not. But that's the sort of faking it until you make it kind of thing I think we have going on, which is legit and useful and true.
Yeah, and I think going back to that idea of teaching and like bringing your process to the surface, like if it is a process, then it is learnable, and like you can apply like these learnings to different scenarios as you go. Oh, that is so interesting. How did you did you feel like you reached your 5-year plan goals?
Yeah, I think it took me a few years more than 5 in the end,
Right.
which is fine. It's fine. Yeah, I think I did. Like, yes, like I said, spoken word poetry, they're not huge art forms. You're certainly not, you don't tend to be household names. I think even the most popular, well-known poets, I think a lot of people would struggle to have heard of. Yeah, so you know, it's not that level of sort of fame or reputation, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, certainly in the sort of spoken word poetry world, I think I'm pretty well known. So what was my aim? It was like a nationally known spoken word poet or something like that. Yeah, I think I'd say I'm there. I
Yeah.
think
Well,
people
you've
know who I am, what I do.
performed
Yeah,
all around the country, haven't you? That's national.
yeah, I definitely feel like there was actually, yeah, I feel like it's hard to kind of identify moments in that sort of evolution from, um, I'm having to, it's like you know, it's a classic metaphor of sort of pushing you know, the snowball effect. You know, you start with this little snowball and it's hard and you're pushing and you're sweating and it's difficult, and then you sort of, it becomes this big thing and it's got its own momentum, and it's picking up snow as you go, almost with a lot less effort. And I certainly feel like there's moments I can identify where it felt like it became easier, in terms of getting gigs or applying for opportunities or whatever that might be. And so if that's a measure of how well known or reputable or whatever, that yeah, there's definitely a progression on that. And as we all know, those first few years or whatever, until you get to a level where you go, oh, the snowball's quite big now, it's moving all right, it's okay, I got it, I still have to push it now and then, but yeah, we're fine. That yeah, just takes time and a constancy, constantly thinking about that stuff.
Is there like, are there things that you can point to in those moments where you said, oh, that became more easy? Like, what were the things that made it seem easier?
I would say the first noticeable one, and going from working, so I was working 4 days a week at Apples and Snakes. I did that for just over 2 years, to maybe 2 years, 3 months, something like that. And I noticed my work was increasing, and it's hard to remember 10 years ago or so, but I think there was a combination of more work coming in. I was in Edinburgh. I was at the Edinburgh Fringe. It may have been during my first show, actually. I got offered the Canterbury Laureateship. So I was going to be Canterbury Laureate, which sounds really impressive. And again, it's that sort of stuff that you put in your CV that other people think, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. He's been Canterbury Laureate. And so I realized that was kind of like quite a good thing. So I got offered that, and but it was a tiny contract, really, really. I think it was just over £1,000, which at the time I was like, whoa, I'm going to earn £1,000. That's not enough that's barely a month's rent in London. That's not really a lot of money. For certainly not enough to make a living. So I took that, but the reputation of that, the sound of that was really cool. So I could lead with that and everything. It's like, oh yes, Dan, Canterbury Laureate. So that felt like a moment. And then a bit more, I think more work came in, and I went down to 2 days a week at Apples and Snakes. And that was one thing about working for the arts public sector arts charity. They were very supportive of artists. Like, oh, good, you're making more money, have more work from your art form. We can drop you down to 2 days a week. So I dropped down to 2 days a week, found that actually I had just about enough. I think I saved enough money to live for 6 months, even if no other work came in. I was like, right, that's a safe way to do this. And so, yeah, then I eventually left that 2 day a week job, because I had just about enough coming in from poetry stuff and a buffer in case it didn't. So yeah, that was definitely one moment I thought, I don't have to push quite as hard, because I've got this title now. It's like this chunk of, to carry on the metaphor, this chunk of, like, this extra layer of snow had been added on, and it made it roll a bit easier. That was certainly one. I can't identify any others between now and then, and that was 8-9 years ago. I think the one I've noticed is actually just in this last year or so. This last year during the pandemic, it was hard at. It's tricky. Yeah, I think I got made Imperial College, London's poet in residence, and I think that's opened up a lot of doors as well. Big scientific institution, world-renowned research, and working with them, and I got Glastonbury Festival's poet in residence this year. Oh my gosh, Viv, I was at simultaneously poet in residence of a cathedral, a university, a festival, and a pub. And it was like, that's a lot. So yeah, I think these sort of things have added up. And then this last year or so, with those kind of credits, yeah, I think working for the National Trust as well, that felt like a big step, because again, a hugely well-known organization, that I did really good work from. And something just as simple as they made an amazing video of the output of the poetry, of the workshops, of the public engagement work I did. And that video is such a good sort of calling card for other projects, because it so effectively demonstrates what I can do and who I am as a person, the energy I bring, and the space I can hold for people and all that stuff. And so, yeah, pairing that with it being the National Trust and a sizable project. It's hard to say that alone helped, but it certainly, well, it did. It's one of the things I could put on near the top of the CV. I could send that video to potential people I want to work with, and it just felt like, this is starting to snowball. This is starting to snowball a bit more, and that seems to have sustained over the last year and a bit, in terms of the work, and applying for opportunities and having a higher hit rate for those opportunities. It's one of those things, they say success breeds success, and I think that's just so true. And it's that initial bit, it's that first bit where you're pushing to whatever the next level you're aiming for, whatever that looks like for you. That's where you have to spend so much energy, but once you get to there, you keep sustaining it. It's easier to stay there, and you can try and push to the next one, sort of thing. They're the two like tipping points I can certainly notice, and they're almost 10 years apart. So a lot of work's happened in the meantime.
So do you how do you sort of structure your income? Do you have like a limited company and you pay yourself, or how do you do it?
I've been a sole trader since I first started. So I've been I set up as soon as I left my job, essentially. I think as soon as I got that first paid gig, that's how I've stayed. I should look into the limited company thing. I know you can like essentially employ yourself and pay less tax or something. I don't know. I'm very happy. I've very happily been a sole trader all this time, and it's been useful. It meant I could get the support grant from the government during the pandemic, because I lost that right in March last year. I think I had about £9,000 worth of work just all go within about 3 days that didn't get replaced. So I was like, right, wow, that's I just moved into a flat in London, had London rent for the first time in a year, and it was like, this is so bad. So that was very useful. But I need to look into the limited company thing.
I do that. It's with my freelance writing, and the main thing for me, because I've only done it in the last year, but it just made me feel much more professional, because I get like a salary from myself as a you pay yourself a salary, and then you can pay yourself dividends, and there's like a little bit of, you have effectively like a higher tax-free threshold from it. But for me, it was mostly just the that's my work over there, and that's in a separate account, doing all that stuff, and that this is for me, and I can sort of see how much like runway I have of paying myself and that kind of thing. So.
I feel really disorganized by comparison. I just have my own bank account, which is still my personal account. That's where I get paid. I keep it all very like rigidly on a spreadsheet. Like my accounts are kept really well, but I wonder if that's partly just unconsciously because I don't feel a separation between who I am and what I do. Like I am a poet like all of the time. It doesn't stop and start. I don't, yes, I sit down at my desk and I do my work, but that's not a different person to the person who just had lunch and the person who's going to go for a run, or the person who's hanging out with pals. They're all just me. Which is really nice in some ways. I mean, it does make I've definitely had that work downtime separation thing is really difficult at times when you're like that. Got a lot better at over the years, but that's certainly, I think I would probably benefit from a more separated approach at times, most likely.
Just depends on what works for you. I mean, I've never
100%.
been organized with my being a sole trader, so I was like, oh, what a revelation. And what do you do with your money when you get it? Like, are you saving for retirement? Are you saving for some other goal? Are you investing in Bitcoin? What do you do?
Oh gosh, I absolutely need to get on top of my pension. I do not have a pension, and I feel bad about that. That's a thing to get on top of this year.
Absolutely. This is my plug for, I have a good one. I really like it. It's called Pension Bee. And I'll send you, I've got a referral code. I'll send it to you. You can get 50 quid. if you use
50 whole
current
pounds.
currency. Yeah.
That's some
Look,
money, isn't
in
it?
30 to 40
All right.
years, 50 whole pounds will be something like 500.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so I need to do that. That's something I've
Yeah.
been bad at. I'm saving for a house deposit. I mean, that's where all my savings go
Mm.
if I make more than I spend. Yeah, they're all currently in some ISA. Yeah, they're either in the Help to Buy ISA or I've bunged them all into premium bonds recently because I
Oh.
was like, the interest rate is so pathetic,
Mm.
so pathetic. I sort of, you know what, I'll bung them in premium bonds. I'll probably earn less, but when you earn 20 quid, I'd rather have a punt, put them in there and have a punt at earning a bit more. So yeah, that's where a lot of my excess money is sitting.
Yeah.
And yeah, ideally working towards getting a deposit for a house, and houses just went up 10% over the last year. So that's cool. That's absolutely fine. I'm sure we'll all be okay.
I
It's
think
terrifying.
this is my very unfounded theory is I think it'll settle down a bit. Everyone just wanted to buy a house because they needed to get out of apartments and
It's true. I
gardens
think
and
I'm hopefully agreeing. Although I don't think I've ever known the property market to go down significantly in my
mm,
lifetime. It did,
yeah.
but then it always comes back. Anyway, that's a whole other.
Yeah, it dips and
The
then it goes
whole.
back again. There's this thing called the 18-year property cycle where
Oh
there's
yeah,
like it's always trending up, but it goes up for a few
mm,
years and then there's a little correction and it goes down and everyone loses
yeah,
their mind. And then it
yeah.
goes up again and then it drops a lot.
Ah.
And so you've got to wait for that. I'm not sure when that is.
All
I'm,
right, I'll buy a house in my mid-50s. Great.
hey, it
Yeah,
might only be a few years away.
gosh, it's scary and horrible. But anyway, I don't try not to think. I just keep putting money in the savings as far as
Yeah.
possible. That's not going to be a bad thing ever.
No.
So no, I don't. I did look. I've not got into crypto at all. I was exploring NFTs for a bit,
Ah.
but
I want to, yeah, I don't know
mm,
much about it other than it's a way for digital like creators to sort of have, well, not ownership, but pass on ownership
to
of,
sell the original of a thing
yeah,
digitally. It's all tulips. It's the Dutch tulip boom
yeah,
of whatever year that was. It's all
yeah,
speculation on things that don't really have much intrinsic value.
yeah.
Well, whatever, that's a big debate as well.
I suppose it,
Yeah,
yeah, it depends on who's buying it, as
well,
with,
it's worth what somebody says it's worth until
yeah.
tomorrow, where it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Crypto's a bit scary. I did
Mm,
look into it. It was exorbitant to just list things on an NFT market. So kind of
mm.
pause that for a little bit. Might go do it though. No, I'm not putting any money into crypto. Um, yeah, anything other than that, what do I buy? Yeah, after basics, nice basics. Uh, yeah, I really craft beer is I definitely I haven't had one. It's definitely something I spend a bit more on than normal. I'd pay £2 or £3 or £4 for a tin or a bottle of beer uh, regularly, which is a nice way. But then again, I don't drink much, so that I'm probably spending less on alcohol than I ever have in my life, despite doing that. That's not a fiscal decision. That's a health decision. Yeah, so decent craft beer, the odd board game, good nights out, sort of to live music or to a club or something like that. Yeah, like not like I think the nicest thing is not feeling like you're watching every penny.
Mm,
And so if somebody says, "Oh, we're going to a restaurant tonight," you just go, and
mm.
the meal is £25 or 30 quid for you, and that's okay. That's doable. Like that's sort of the nicest feeling of yeah, sort of not worrying too much about money. But I've certainly it's funny to compare that to when I first started, where I was staring at the last 30 quid in my bank account,
Mm.
and I have a safety net of sorts. Like if I ran out of money and everything went terribly, I could go stay at my dad's or stay at my mum's. So I've got a basic shelter
Mm.
safety net. But yeah, like when I got down to I I've been really fortunate. I've never had to sort of skip rent, or even when I was living with my mum in London and I was down to that last 30 quid, I've always very much found a way, or something has come in to sort of mean I could make my rent that month and bills that month. It's very much like a thing my dad has drilled into me. We were very much brought up with, you know, you take care of your own financial security very, very robustly. If you can't afford it, you don't buy it. If you don't buy stuff on credit, absolutely don't do that. I have a credit card now, but that's just for everyday things that I'm going to be buying anyway. So yeah, you don't do a big purchase unless a car or something maybe, but even then,
Not like a
yeah,
holiday.
no, nothing that's not as essential or that you feel very safe in paying back. So yeah, very much sort of those lessons were drilled in, and just a kind of pride around that, really. Sort of, you don't go to your parents for money. You might go for a loan. I did my master's, and my dad lent me some money to do that, but I paid him back within 3 months, sort of thing. It's very much like you pay your own way. You don't rely on other people to foot the bill and stuff like that. And taking a loan out is very much something you don't do for personal reasons, sort of thing. So yeah, when I got down to that last 30 quid at the beginning of my career, it was terrifying, because I was like, if I have to not make rent, it's such a sad and somewhat shameful thing. So it's nice to be in a position where I feel a bit safer in my self-employed creative career as a poet, which is really nice. So yeah, I can buy a decent craft beer, I can have a night out, and it's sort of not gonna break the bank, sort of thing, or I don't have to watch every penny on that night out, sort of thing. Yeah it's a big change from 8-9 years ago.
Yeah. But what a great kind of vision of being like going from like struggling artist to actually 10 years in, you know what? I
Yeah,
can afford most of the
and
things that I want.
what's really sad and a shame is that's becoming harder and harder to do. I think it's always been hard, and in all art forms you meet people who come from quite privileged backgrounds who haven't had to really worry about money in the same way. And it's becoming tougher and tougher, I think, as austerity has sort of leaves its legacy, and there's less public funding, and it's harder and harder to take a risk. It's harder and harder to take a chance, or to develop your talent and skill into something that might be something of a living. When you have pressing needs like rent and food, which is insanely expensive in a lot of cities now, not just London, food, which is going up in price, transport, if you have children, if you have people who depend on you, all these things, etc., 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 all these things without wealth, it's really, really hard. So yeah, it's a real it's reducing the plurality of voices in the arts scene broadly. And I think especially when these things affect working class people more and disproportionately to people who have more money or financial security, they're the voices we need to be hearing to actually make the changes happen. So it's a horrible cycle of sort of the wrong, not the right voices being sort of prioritized because they're not coming through as much. I think to a degree that is being corrected. There's a much more of a push towards other voices in lots of aspects of culture in the last few years. But getting to that level is becoming increasingly hard, I think. That sort of notion of a struggling artist who makes it into a living or into a success of some sort. It's a classic narrative, but I think, and it makes sense, but for some artists, they haven't had that struggle really,
Yeah, definitely.
quite as much. So yeah, it's definitely an important thing there. Something else I was going to say around that. What was it? No, it's gone. There was something around class and making it in the arts. No, it's gone. I'm sure it wasn't important.
Alas. But yeah, that is such a, I know, I like it's come up in the course of making this podcast a lot, and it's something that I'm, very aware of. I remember years ago, someone won a playwriting award, and she was from a working class background, and at the time she was also working part-time in retail.
Right.
And all of the newspapers had this shop assistant wins playwriting
Mm,
award, and she wrote this great piece about how if that's the thing you pull out, she's like, I'm actually a master's degree educated
yeah.
playwright,
Hmm.
but if you emphasize the part where I work in a shop, that suggests that genius can just sort of spring from
Hmm.
anywhere with no investment from the
Yeah.
wider community.
Yeah.
And I was so struck by that story. I've always it was one of the things that made me eventually think I want to start having more of these conversations with people,
Mm,
because we're not talking about it. And I think you were saying before, people kind of you're saying it about the process, but I think
mm.
it applies here too. They sort of hide it away a little bit, because then it seems like, oh, we're all on the same even keel, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's being spoken about more, but I think it's definitely one of the great unspoken things
Mm,
in almost every, well, yeah, certainly in every industry, but something like the arts where there's less of to be an artist, you don't necessarily join a corporate structure. You don't have there's no entry level requirements for art. You don't need a degree or A levels or a qualification to join. You essentially try to make your own space in a way that joining a company or an institution, the space is there, you go and fill it. And so there's the linear path upwards. Again, there's privilege and hugely inbuilt into those structures as well.
mm,
Um, but to some degree, you can say, well, there is an element of meritocracy because you need to fulfill X, Y, and Z. You need to have these skills, blah 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 blah. You could fit that space with what you've done so far. If you know the boss's boss because he's your dad's best friend, cool, that's going to help. But you can still see it being possible to go make it in those sort of institutions and structures. Whereas the art thing, taking away, there's arts organizations, but the creativity side of things, making that space for yourself when you're also having to, put food on the table and pay rent and all that stuff. Yeah, an entirely different thing. And by the way, get good at your art. Get good at your art form, network, go turn up to all the events, blah 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 blah. All the
mm,
time you have to spend that you're
mhm,
potentially working a 40-hour week, it just doesn't it doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's a huge element, and that's why we need stuff like the Arts Council, and public funding, because you're right, the brilliant artists come out of backgrounds where that privilege isn't in existence for them. So we want great art, we want challenging art, we want art that sort of looks at where we're at and how we can make it better. That's probably going to come up from the bottom rather than from people who've already benefited from the structures. Well, people do that as well, of course. So yeah, it's hugely important, hugely important.
mm. Um, all right. I think I've kept you a long time. But one last question before we go.
Yeah.
If you were giving yourself some advice when you were starting out full time 10 or 8 years ago,
Yeah.
what would you say?
What would I say to myself? um I'd like to reassure myself that it gets easier. That you know I think that guy, past Dan, I like to think about past Dan and future Dan, and sort of saying thanks to past Dan and thinking, what will future Dan be pleased about?
Mm,
So I think thinking about past Dan, uh I'd say, you're doing the work, and you're putting the shift in, and you're making some smart decisions uh for your, in terms of work anyway. um I would probably say, yeah, it gets a bit easier. What you're doing now is worthwhile and moving you towards where you want to be. I'd probably encourage him to take a few more risks. I
hmm.
don't know what that looks like exactly. But yeah, I mean, I feel quite, in some ways, conservative as an artist with a small c. I feel like I think about decisions. I think about what's going to lead towards my bank account being healthy. I make decisions that are sort of feel like what I can do. Maybe a bit of a push, but not necessarily that big. I'm going to go sod it and no other work for 3 months. I'm going to make my passion project. I'm moving towards that now. I hope. That's the other thing, of course, that speaking about class and privilege, you know, as an artist who has a more where the money is more important, you have less freedom to just make what you want to make. So that's one element, which is tricky, I think. So yeah, I'd probably encourage him to really think about what he wants to make, not maybe do things that are just what feel like what should be next. Less should, I think. Less should do the thing. More what can you do? What are you capable of? What would make your heart soar and your soul sing and that sort of stuff. Yeah, a little more risk on that, but I only know that because I'm okay now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that.
Oh, well, that's really lovely. Dan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Viv. This has been absolutely stimulating. I loved it.
Great. Okay. Thank you for tuning in to the Artists Make Money podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Artists Make Money, where you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can find me on Twitter at vivegan41, and you'll find Dan on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Dan Simpson Poet. The music for this podcast was composed by Tiiva, and you can find them at Tiiva Music, and we will link to all of those things in the show notes. If you enjoyed the show, I would love it if you would give us a follow, share it with a friend, write a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps new people to find the show. Being an artist is hard, and making a living from it is even harder, but I believe in you. Keep going.